I don't know anyone that would want to hurt her. He was as nice a person as there is.
Was she moving soon? Did you know anything about her?
Yeah. She was going to be moving out today. Why would anyone do this?
You may be forgiven to think that this man is devastated after finding out that his friend has just been murdered. But what if I told you that he is the killer? He thought that his concerned friend act would fool everyone, even the police. But he had another thing coming. This is the shocking case of the boy who dismembered his classmate and did an interview on it. Beautiful, intelligent, and popular, Lauren Giddings was going to take the legal world by storm. At 27 years old, she had already graduated from Mercer University Law School in Macon, Georgia, and was preparing to take the bar exam before finally becoming a certified defense lawyer.
Lauren going to college was huge. No one in our family had ever been to college.
Despite being hundreds of miles away from her family in Maryland, Lauren would talk to them every weekend and go home every chance she got.
She always would come home for most holidays that she could, or we'd go there, and even when she wasn't, she called home every Sunday to talk to my grandmother that lives across the field.
On June 29th, 2011, one of Lauren's sisters became concerned when Lauren didn't respond to any of her text messages.
Throughout the week leading up to Wednesday, I had called, emailed, and texted her, but it was nothing serious. So when she didn't respond, I never thought anything weird of it. It was just something that I never really needed an answer to.
She'd contacted Lauren's friends at the university to see if they had seen or heard from her, but they hadn't. Lauren lived alone in an apartment near the university, so the friends decided to go check on her. When they got there, they noticed that Lauren's car was still in the parking lot, but strangely enough, she didn't answer the door when they knocked. One of the friends, Ashley Morehouse, knew where Lauren kept her spare keys, so she unlocked the door and they went in. Everything in the house seemed intact, but something was off.
And she went in, called me back, said that all of her stuff was there, purse, keys, the car was still out front, wallet, school ID.
At this point, Lauren's friends and family knew that something was wrong, and they immediately called the police. When the police arrived, they noted that there was no sign of a break-in or anything to indicate that a struggle had taken place, but strangely, Lauren's essentials such as her wallet, laptop, and cell phone were still in the room, so where was Lauren? Police began by interviewing all of Lauren's friends and neighbors to establish a timeline of when she disappeared. Ashley, who was one of Lauren's closest friends, gave an emotional account of the last time she saw her.
When was the last time you've actually physically seen Lauren?
It would be early Saturday morning at about 4 a.m. That Friday night, we went out to the bar, and she came back to my boyfriend's place to stay for the evening.
Did you see Lauren when you woke up that morning?
No.
You're just assuming she was there?
Yes.
Did you ever see her or talk to her again?
No.
Another person who was interviewed by the police was Lauren's next-door neighbor and classmate, 25-year-old Stephen McDaniel, who was also among the people who had gone into Lauren's apartment to check on her. At one point, Stephen had asked Lauren out, but she declined since she was seeing someone else. Stephen was very forthcoming with the police, answering all of their questions and promising to help in any way he could to find Lauren.
How long have you lived next to Lauren?
Since I started law school back in, it'd be August of 08, I think.
When was the last time you think you seen Lauren?
It was either last week or the week before that.
Okay. Is there anything that you could tell me today or add to your statement that could help me locate Lauren?
I can't think of anything.
Stephen would also go on to give a TV interview to a local news station, expressing his concern for Lauren, whom he said was his friend.
We're just trying to find out where she is at this point. I mean, no one has seen her since Saturday. I mean, the last time anyone heard from her was an email that she sent out, and no one's heard from her since.
Did you see her hang out with anyone at the time, anything like that?
I mean, no one has seen her since Saturday. I haven't seen anything. I mean, you always hear noise outside, but it's just people walking by pretty much.
And she just recently graduated from Mercer?
Yeah, she and I we were both JD students, We graduated back in May.
What kind of person was she? I mean, what did you see?
I mean, she's as nice as can be. I mean, very personable, very much a people person.
Do you know any enemies she might have had, somebody that might want to hurt her?
No, we don't know where she is.
Meanwhile, investigators were going around searching for clues that might help them figure out what happened to Lauren. During their rounds, one of the detectives caught a whiff of something foul. The detectives followed the smell to a nearby trash can, which by sheer luck had not been emptied because the garbage truck was running late. When the detective opened one of the trash cans, he gasped in horror at what he saw: a woman's torso wrapped inside a plastic bag. Her head, legs, and arms were missing, and the detectives could not find them in any of the other trash cans. Although the torso was not initially identified as Lauren's, DNA results later confirmed that it was hers. What kind of monster would do this to her? Stephen learned about Lauren's remains being found during his TV interview, and his reaction was captured on camera.
What about in the parking lot area? I know they've been doing a lot of, I think that's where they have recovered the body or whatever they recovered from there.
Body?
Had you seen anything there? Had you seen anything there? I mean, we don't know if this is the same person. You know what I mean? Like, they took out a body there earlier. We don't know if it's the same person or not. So that's how we're trying to ask people if they know who lived there. Are you okay, sir?
I think I need to sit down.
The news of Lauren's body being found seemed to have hit him pretty hard, which is quite understandable given that he was her friend. Or was he? Lauren's case had now turned into a homicide investigation, and several people, including Stephen, were brought in for questioning.
You told me in your statement that you've been home all week, right? All weekend? Mm-hmm. Has anybody come visit you while you were home? Mm-hmm. You didn't have no friends over? Mm-hmm. Anybody see you this weekend that you've been home?
I don't know.
I had asked you in your statement because I've asked everyone that lives in that apartment complex if it would be all right for us to search their apartment, give me consent to search. Yeah. I'm asking that I would be there and that no one's going to search your apartment without you being present, right? Mm-hmm. And in your statement, you stated that you didn't want me to do that.
I've got several firearms that I have.
While it did take a little convincing, Stephen finally allowed detectives to search his apartment, and what they found was truly shocking. A collection of swords and guns and toilet rolls, and a stockpile of provisions, as if he was expecting some kind of apocalyptic event. There was also a pair of women's undergarments that tested positive for Lauren's DNA. But what was even more bizarre was a master key that seemed to open every apartment in the complex. When questioned about it, Stephen admitted that he had broken into 2 neighbors' apartments and stolen some stuff from them. Lauren had previously mentioned to her sister that she suspected that someone had been inside her apartment. After this confession, Stephen was arrested for burglary and brought in for further interrogation.
I just got to ask you a few questions. You came down earlier tonight, me and you talked, all right. You don't have any weapons on you, do you? No. That's just you are. What's wrong? You know I'm Detective Patterson, right?
Yes.
Do you remember? Put your hands up here. You remember us talking earlier tonight, right?
Yes.
You remember me earlier in the day?
Yes.
When we came down here and talked a little bit and then we left?
Yes.
Okay.
Now, notice how his demeanor has changed since his last interview. Experts have explained this weird, zombie-like behavior could either be some sort of mental breakdown or a ploy to throw off the detectives. Either way, it is really creepy, and you can tell that the detective is also weirded out by it.
I need to know about this girl right here. You know her?
Yes.
Who is that?
Lauren Giddings.
Does she live next door to you?
Yes.
When's the last time you seen her?
2 or 3 weeks ago.
Okay. Was you friends with Lauren?
Yes.
Look at me when talking, son.
Stephen would maintain this act all throughout the interrogation, answering almost every question with either a yes, a no, or I don't know. The detectives tried every trick in the book to get him to talk, with another detective even coming in to help. But Stephen remained consistent with his monotone answers.
Where's that little girl, Stephen?
I don't know.
Stephen, you know. You're going to look at this right here, this little girl right here, and you're going to say you don't know? I know you know.
I don't know.
Yes, you know. What are you going to say tomorrow when I say we got your hair? What are you going to say to me then? Because you know, like I go like that. Look at my hair. That's how easy it falls out. Look at all that on your head.
While the interrogation ended without Stephen ever saying anything to incriminate himself, the detectives already had more than enough evidence to charge him with Lauren's murder.
He had in his possession both the master key and a key to her apartment. He had a flash drive that belonged to her that contained hundreds of her personal photos. His computer history showed an interest in her Facebook and LinkedIn pages, and sometimes would be searching for images of her around the same time that he was looking up violent pornography.
And, like that's not already creepy enough, investigators found a deleted video in his computer that turned out to be footage of someone looking through Lauren's window on the night she was murdered.
He took a wooden pole and he duct taped that camera to the end of the pole, and then he held the pole up really high to peek inside her window.
On top of all this, investigators also found a hacksaw in the supply closet of the building that had red stains that matched Lauren's DNA. The packaging box for the exact same hacksaw was found inside Stephen's apartment alongside a red-stained sheet that would also test positive for Lauren's DNA. As the evidence continued piling up against him, Stephen finally pleaded guilty to Lauren's murder, giving a chilling account of how everything happened. Apparently, on the morning of June 25th, at around 4:30 a.m., he entered Lauren's apartment wearing a mask and found her in bed. He went on to say that she saw me and said very calmly, "Get the F out." Stephen said that he leaped across the bed and grabbed her by the neck and started choking her. Lauren fought back with everything she had, and the two tumbled out of bed to the floor, and in her struggle to get away, she moved her legs and lower body under her bed, preventing her from moving or kicking him. In the struggle, Lauren managed to pull off Stephen's mask, and when she saw that it was him, she reportedly said, "Stephen, please stop." But he didn't. He continued choking her until she was dead, and then dragged her body to the bathroom and left her there. He waited until midnight and then came back with the hacksaw and dismembered her body. He then placed her limbs and head in various trash cans throughout the area. Tragically, they have never been recovered.
He pleaded to breaking into Lauren's apartment, to killing her, to moving her to the bathroom, to taking her body apart, to hiding it, to ripping up evidence and putting it down the toilet, cleaning up everything, and then acting like she was still alive.
Stephen was sentenced to life imprisonment and will not be eligible for parole until 2041.
And he goes, "Shh, you gotta, there's a body in there." No, there's not. No, there's not. You don't believe me? Come and see.
Oscar 911, do you need police, fire, or EMS? Please, hurry, please hurry. Our address of the emergency? It's an Orange Tree Apartment, 25th Street. It's 20. Ma'am, hello? Ma'am, I need the address.
The blood-curdling screams you just heard came out of Sharon Cave. On August 18th, 2005, Sharon and her fiancé Jim drove to Austin, Texas. Sharon had been calling her daughter, Jennifer Cave, for 2 days, with no response. Upon getting into the apartment, Sharon and Jim would be greeted by a sight that would send chills down their bones and produce a kind of soul-crushing scream from Sharon that a human body should not be able to produce. This is the case of the young woman who was found dismembered in a bathtub.
Cave was multiple times, her head and hands severed from her body. She was found in the bathtub of a West Campus apartment.
On August 17th, 2005, one day before the gruesome discovery that shook the state of Texas to its core, Sharon Cave was on the phone with her daughter's employer. The woman on the phone informed Sharon that her daughter, Jennifer Cave, had not resumed work yet. Sharon begged the woman to give her time to figure out why Jennifer had not shown up to work. She promised she would get back to her before the end of the day with an answer. Sharon never did. When Sharon was done speaking with the woman, she was very confused. Jennifer had always been very excited to tell her about the new job. She still remembered the phone call and Jennifer's screams as she answered the phone. Her voice laced with hope and excitement for the future. Sharon was very happy for Jennifer. It truly felt like that day was the beginning of the rest of her life. But little did Sharon know, that phone call would be the last time she would hear Jennifer's sweet voice ever again. Sharon was filled with dread. She hadn't received a text from Jennifer to tell her she had resumed work like she promised, and to make things worse, Jennifer wasn't picking up her calls. She tried her number again, but like many times before, she was met with a silence that turned her stomach. Something was wrong, of that she was sure. It was very unlike Jennifer to not check in, and it was even less like her not to pick up calls or call back to say she was busy. She knew she had to do something. She couldn't call the police because they likely wouldn't take a missing case of a college student who had gone out partying the day before seriously. But Sharon didn't want to believe Jennifer was missing. She instead held on to the hope that she was passed out drunk in her apartment after a night of celebrating her new job and simply forgot to get up for work. But even as the thought took hold, Sharon couldn't shake the feeling deep down. The reality was much worse. She decided to call Jennifer's network provider and find out who Jennifer had called or met up with the night before to see if they had seen her. In those days, privacy rules were a bit lax, and Sharon was able to get the phone numbers of the people Jennifer had spoken to the night before. The last call she made was to a guy named Michael Rodriguez. Sharon called up Michael and asked him if he met up with Jennifer or knew what had happened to her the night before. He told her Jennifer had called him in the middle of the night on her way home from a bar. She had been with another one of her friends named Colton Pataniak. He said that Jennifer calling him was very random as they weren't very close. Jennifer didn't sound that drunk, but Colton was drunk and causing a ruckus. Michael could hear Jennifer telling Colton to behave himself several times in the background. But then Michael told Sharon one thing that made that feeling of dread in the pit of her stomach get even bigger. He told her he was a bit worried because Jennifer promised to call him back the minute she got home, but she never did. Chills went down Sharon's spine. She hung up the call and checked the list of calls she had been given and saw that Colton had called Jennifer the night before. Sharon called Colton and he told her he didn't know where Jennifer was and he hadn't seen her that day. Sharon didn't buy it. She asked him if he was sure he didn't know where Jennifer was, to which he replied, yes. At this point, Sharon decided to call the police and told them everything she had found out. She then called Colton back to let him know she had reported the case to the police and they likely would be stopping by to question him. She proceeded to ask him if there was anything he wanted to say to her. Colton said no. Sharon waited for more information from the police, but by the next day, there was nothing. The police told her that although they had found Jennifer's car outside Colton's apartment, they were waiting for a warrant to go into Colton's apartment. Sharon couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible had happened to her daughter, and she could just not sit and wait for the news. So she told her fiance, Jim Sedgwick, about it, and they decided to drive up to Austin to speak to Colton in person. The drive was long and exhausting, but the entire time they were on the road, Sharon was silently praying her daughter was okay and passed out someplace. They got to Austin and went straight to Orange Tree Apartments, 23rd Street. They knocked on Colton's door, but there was no response. Sharon and Jim got increasingly anxious as they waited for someone to come to the door. But after a few minutes, there was still no answer, and they realized there was a likelihood that no one was home. Sharon could not wait any longer. She needed to find out if Jennifer was okay right that moment. So Sharon, a law-abiding citizen who had never broken any law, found herself slipping the window lock while Jim climbed inside. When Jim got into the apartment, he found it in complete disarray. There were clothes and other stuff strewn about the apartment, drawers had been left open, almost like someone left the apartment in a hurry. But there was one thing Jim noticed the moment he climbed in that window. There was a dreadful smell in the air. The entire apartment was filled with it. Jim went through the house bit by bit looking for Jennifer. As he passed by one room, he saw that the bathroom door had been left open and the lights still on. Jim had an uneasy feeling, but He pushed the door further open, and what he saw would send shockwaves through his body. It was a gruesome scene, like nothing he had ever seen before. Laying in the bathtub was the body of a young woman, only the body was missing a head and arms. The body had on a patterned green dress that was all too familiar to him. Jim knew he was looking at the dismembered body of his stepdaughter, whom he loved. Jim immediately went cold. The only thing he could feel was his lunch fighting to make its way back out of his body. He immediately ran to Sharon and told her about the horrific scene he had walked into. Sharon too went into shock. They called 911 to report the gory bathroom scene. Sharon only made it a few minutes into the phone call before loud screams racked her body.
Austin 911, Denise Police, fire or EMS. Please, where are you guys? Our address of the emergency. It's at Orange Tree Apartments, 25th Street. It's 20. Can't get the address. Ma'am, hello? Ma'am, I need the address.
At this point, Sharon could no longer speak, so Jim took over. Sharon's screams could still be heard in the background.
This is 911. We have a lot of help on the way. I just need to be able to confirm if she is conscious and breathing.
No, I think she's dead.
Okay. Is there any way, do you think that we can go in there and get her flat on her back and we need to start CPR until the paramedics can get there?
There's nothing. I don't want to touch it. I mean, this is a real gruesome messed up scene now.
Okay, so she is past, you believe she's past doing CPR?
I do, and I also believe that we've got a crime scene here that I don't want to disturb.
Austin police quickly arrived to Colton's apartment and got to work preserving the scene. The investigation would reveal even more gory details of the horrific murder of Jennifer Cave. Inside the bathtub, they found Jennifer's body, handless and headless. In a trash bag just beside the bathtub were the missing body parts. An autopsy revealed Jennifer died as a result of a bullet wound to the chest. The officers found a single shell casing in the bathtub. It also revealed Jennifer had been stabbed several times. But there was one bizarre discovery made during her autopsy that left the medical experts puzzled and chilled the community. Jennifer's dismembered head had a bullet in it. The autopsy showed that another bullet had been fired up through Jennifer's severed neck and into her brain, a particularly gruesome detail that would remain unexplained. The gruesome nature of this murder left the town of Austin shocked and in anguish. How could someone do something so horrific and depraved?
Cave was shot and stabbed multiple times, her head and hands severed from her body. She was found in the bathtub of a West Campus apartment.
Several questions racked the community. Who was Jennifer Cave, and what event led to that bone-chilling discovery on August 17th, 2005? Jennifer Cave was an ambitious young woman born on March 12, 1984, to Sharon and Charles Cave. She grew up in a large family with 3 siblings who loved and cared for each other. Jennifer was a happy child who loved school and studied to the best of her ability. Outside of school, she loved extracurricular activities and could often be found at cheer practice when she didn't have a book in her hand. But when Jennifer was still young, her parents decided to go their separate ways. This would be very hard on her as she loved her family. But her mom would go on to meet Jim Sedgwick, and though Jennifer and her siblings were a little skeptical at first, they soon embraced Jim after they got to know how amazing he was. Jim treated Sharon's children just like they were his, and the newly blended family would move to Corpus Christi, Texas to start their new lives. By 2002, Jennifer was a high school graduate looking to get into college and study finance. But since she didn't want to move away from her family for school, she applied to colleges within Texas. She eventually got into Texas State University. Jennifer was excited. She was happy to start her college life and work towards making a name for herself in the finance world. She moved to college with the hopes and dreams of making it big in finance. But unfortunately, after one semester in college, Jennifer dropped out. Her reasons for leaving are not clear, but she dropped out of Texas State University and she never gave up on her dream to study finance. She moved to Austin, Texas and got a spot at the Austin Community College. Though Austin was a very expensive city to live in, that didn't deter Jennifer. It only gave her more resolve to succeed and have financial success. She got a job at a restaurant where she would work in the evening after classes. She settled into student life quite easily and made friends. Although she was pretty focused on her education, Jennifer made time to party with her friends like every college student. Her active social life never interfered with her studies, and although she sometimes experimented with recreational substances, it never became a habit. Unfortunately, that couldn't be said for some of Jennifer's friends, including Colton Petaniak. Jennifer and Colton had grown close during her time in Austin, and he quickly became one of her closest friends. Colton, a privileged boy from Arkansas whose childhood had revolved around studying and going to church, turned wild when he got to college. His newfound freedom afforded him the party lifestyle he'd always wanted, and he took advantage of it. He was often out partying, and in no time, he developed a substance problem. He was shipped off to rehab, but he relapsed after his release. And in 2004, he was arrested and charged with drug possession after the police found and other drugs in his car. He pleaded guilty to the charges and spent 20 days in prison. Colton continued to abuse narcotics after his release. Though his party ways brought him close to Jennifer, they were not similar at all. Jennifer cared about being focused on school and had a plan for when she graduated. They became unlikely friends, and when Jennifer graduated community college and got a job as a legal assistant at a law firm, Colton called to congratulate her. He suggested they go out to celebrate. Jennifer knew she would need to get up early for work, but she didn't mind a drink or two to celebrate the good news. They went to a bar called 6 Cents in Austin. Jennifer kept her drinking to a minimum, while Colton pounded back shot after shot, often excusing himself to go to the bathroom, probably to use narcotics. By the end of the night, Colton was both drunk and high, and Jennifer struggled to get him home. She wanted to make sure he got home okay, as he was not in the state to take care of himself. She called Michael to let him know where she was, telling him that she would call him when she got home. Her reason for calling Michael is unclear, but it's possible she sensed she was in some kind of danger with Colton and wanted someone to know where she was in case something happened to her. Jennifer was right. Something did happen to her. And that call she made to Michael was the clue that cracked the case wide open. While the officers searched Colton's apartment, one thing was clear. Colton was nowhere to be found. Although it looked like he fled his apartment, he did make one mistake that led the police right to him. Colton took his phone with him, so officers were able to track him, and they discovered that his phone pinged in Mexico. But they were left with more questions. His car was still in front of his house, so how did he get to Mexico? But a phone call from a concerned parent a couple of days later would provide more information that would lead to Colton's capture. Warren Hall, the father of Colton's ex-girlfriend Laura Hall, had received a rather concerning email from his daughter. She told him to clear her entire apartment. Alarm bells went off in Lauren's head, and he quickly called the police. He told them that he was worried that his daughter had run off with Colton, as he knew she was a little obsessed with him. CCTV footage would show Laura's car at the Mexican border with Colton sitting comfortably in the passenger seat. The footage was dated August 18th and timestamped 2:41 a.m., the day after Jennifer was murdered. Laura and Colton were quickly found in Mexico, as they weren't trying to lay low. After all, they had just gotten away with murder, or so they thought. With the help of the Mexican police, Laura and Colton were arrested on August 22nd, 2005, 5 days after the murder of Jennifer Cave. They were extradited to the US, where Colton faced a murder charge and Laura was detained for questioning. By the end of that interrogation session, the police became sure that Laura did more than help Colton escape.
And he goes, shh, you gotta, there's a body. No, there's not. No, there's not. You don't believe me? Come and see. There's a body in the bathtub. Put the machete on top of it.
Laura told the officers that Colton called her at 6 a.m. to come to the apartment, and that's when he led her to see Jennifer's body in the bathtub.
He said he was gonna put the body.
Okay. After he told you what he planned to do with the body,
Yeah.
did he ask you to help him?
No.
Laura claimed Colton asked her to get out of the apartment while he went to the hardware store and bought a hacksaw, garbage bags, cleaning products, and rubber gloves. Investigation showed that around the same time, Laura drove her green Cadillac to a gas station where she filled the tank and washed the car. Now, while Laura claimed that she was not there when Colton cut Jennifer's body, Colton told a different story. Colton's defense hinged on painting Laura as the mastermind of the plan to dismember her body. Colton pleaded not guilty to the murder charges, claiming that he was so high on narcotics and alcohol that he blacked out, and when he came to, he found Jennifer dead in the bathtub.
And he later testified that while he doesn't remember killing Cave, he must have done it.
The prosecution pointed out the many holes in Colton's story. They argued that it was hard to believe that he went to a hardware store in a drug-induced state to purchase items he used to dismember her body. The jury did not buy Colton's defense, and he was found guilty of the murder of Jennifer Cave and sentenced to 55 years in prison. Laura Hall was convicted of tampering with evidence and hindering the apprehension of Colton Pataniak. She was sentenced to 10 years in prison.
It's just very hard to think that she was.
I was saying that he murdered my sister.
To use the last moments of her life to sit down and to give everything she could.
It was one of the strongest demonstrations of strength and fortitude that I've ever seen. Mr. Brimminger really took both of their daughters.
When Yvonne Baldelli met Brian Brimmager in a California nightclub in 2009, she was love-struck. He was a tall, handsome ex-Marine who promised a life of relaxation, high living, and traveling. Within 2 years, they moved from sunny Panama, and Yvonne was still gushing over him to her family. But that year, she would vanish without a trace, and her desperate family would work for 2 long years to help authorities find her. When her dismembered body was found in the Panamanian jungle, the full horror began to unfold. What Brian did to Yvonne, her dog, and her family is disgusting, and that's an understatement. Yvonne's parents, James and Lillian, hardly feel like they got justice for their daughter, and before the case was over, their other daughter lost her life too, and they blame Brimmager. This is the full, tragic story of Yvonne Baldelli. Yvonne grew up in Southern California with her parents and 2 siblings.
She had one older sister and one older brother. She was the baby of the family at the time.
Her parents split when she was very young, but when she was 14, her dad James married Lillian, who took Yvonne and her siblings as her own children.
I just loved her. She was very special, and she was a very happy person.
Yvonne was nearing her 40th birthday when she met Brian Brimmager in a nightclub in 2009.
He served in the Marine Corps, and there were people who liked him. He had a gregarious personality. I think women found him attractive. Yvonne Baldelli certainly did.
Brian was 6'2" and exuded a kind of confidence that Yvonne yearned for. You see, over the past few years, Yvonne had gone through a string of jobs and relationships, all of which seemed to make her feel unsatisfied and wanting more. When Brian came along, he seemed to paint an optimistic future. He was the funny, charming type who was always surrounded by people in awe of him. One might say be aware of people this charming and popular, but few are as monstrous as Brian Brimmager. Yvonne could have never imagined what was going on inside his mind. No one really did.
She was obviously very smitten with him.
Almost to the detriment of anybody else in her life.
Some people, when they fall in love, tend to forget about their friends and family and focus all their energy on their newfound crush. Yvonne wasn't always like this, but with Brian it was different. She hadn't felt like this in a long time, she would tell her friends. But Brian was problematic in more than one way. For starters, he was married to someone else.
Mr. Brimminger was married at the time and was in other relationships, but was seeing her.
Yvonne didn't know that he was married when they first started dating. When she did find out, she was furious. She hated being lied to. So she wrote a letter to Brian's wife.
She wrote a letter to Brimminger's then wife, describing the relationship that Brimminger had with her, that he had with another woman by the name of Kristen Werkhoven.
You'd think that they'd have broken up after this. Instead, Brian got divorced and continued to see Yvonne on and off. Then, in 2011, Yvonne shocked her family with a creepy piece of news.
Her words to me was that Brian came home and he says, "I'm retiring." At that time, she had lost her job. He told her, forget about the job search, we're going to Panama.
The minute Brian suggested the two start a new life in Panama, Yvonne was ready to leave her old life behind. She sold everything she owned.
She told me she was going to design clothes and sell them on the beach.
She had a plan.
Yes.
She had a plan and she was so happy.
Yvonne took her dog, Georgia, and a few sewing machines with her and flew to Boca Palos del Toro, a small expat community in Panama, in October 2011.
They'd settled in fairly quickly to the island of Isla Canero.
Brian would play music at local bars, and Yvonne was planning her clothing venture. But this was the first time these two were spending all their time together, and it wasn't going well.
The violence began to escalate almost immediately when they arrived in Panama.
According to several witness reports, Brian was a raging alcoholic and a white powder addict. In Panama, it was easier to produce these than ever before. And with this behavior, Brian became even more possessive, manipulative, and violent than he was back in California. There were also people who saw Yvonne being jealous and possessive towards Brian, and this triggered him in a violent way.
What the landlord said is that every time they were together, she observed Miss Baldelli being jealous and trying to push and prod Mr. Brimminger.
We have multiple witnesses who have all corroborated and told us about the numerous times when Brian would punch Yvonne, when Brian would strangle Yvonne, when Brian would her neighbor could hear it through the walls.
Yvonne had made friends in Panama, and there was more than one person who asked her about the marks on her face. Yvonne never denied Brian being the perpetrator, but she always said, "I can handle this."
Do you believe Yvonne was a victim of domestic violence?
Yes, absolutely.
Do you believe Brian Brimminger was a victim of domestic violence?
Absolutely.
Yep. This is how Yvonne thought she could handle it. She fought back, one time smashing Brian's laptop into him. November 8th, 2011 was the last day their neighbors reported a DV incident. After 2 days of complete silence, they both appeared in town, but Yvonne was covering her face.
There's photographs that she took from her own laptop of her left eye having a massive bruise.
A later report would state that Brian was even more violent with her after she broke his laptop.
The laptop broke. That had an unintended consequence. The consequence is that they were now both checking their email on the same laptop.
Yvonne never stopped mistrusting Brian, ever since she found out about his wife or other girlfriend, Kristen. So even though she agreed to move to Panama with him, she was still convinced he was cheating on her. Unfortunately, she was right. When Yvonne checked Brian's emails one day, she discovered an ongoing conversation with his old girlfriend, Kristen Werkoven. Just like he'd promised Yvonne the world, he was promising Kristen he would be with her again.
He was saying, "I'll be back home to spend time with you and help raise our daughter."
Yup, they even had a daughter, one that neither Yvonne nor his ex-wife knew about. On November 26th, Yvonne woke Brian up screaming so loud their neighbors could hear everything. Yvonne couldn't believe Brian was still living a double life. Brian couldn't believe that Yvonne had gone snooping around his emails.
They got into a fight. That fight escalated.
But as their concerned neighbors listened, screams turned to thuds and then turned to silence. After this, there were no signs of Yvonne. Around mid-December, Brian flew back to San Diego. When his friends asked him where Yvonne was, he cussed at her, and she started seeing another man. Funny he should be so jealous given that he had multiple relationships at any given time. He also texted one of his friends this, "I ditched the bitch." Brian also had to visit Yvonne's sister, Michelle, to pick up the truck he'd left on her driveway. Michelle hadn't heard from her sister in 3 weeks.
So he has to face the sister.
Does, and she asks Brian, "Where's my sister?"
Brian said Yvonne had found out about his secret daughter with Kristen. After a fight, she ran off with another man to Costa Rica. He knew nothing of her whereabouts, he said, and Michelle should stop asking questions he could not answer. But Michelle and her parents knew Brian wasn't telling the truth. Michelle even told Brian she would report Yvonne missing to the authorities. Brian said, "Let's not rush to do that. Let me try to reach out to her via email first." To Michelle's surprise, she soon got an email from Yvonne, letting her know she was alive and would be home for their usual big family gathering on January 12th. Michelle replied, "So glad you responded. Didn't want to pry or bug, but I was worried. Wanted to make sure you weren't kidnapped and someone pretending it was you. Ha ha." But Michelle stayed suspicious, and so did her parents, James and Lillian. As they emailed Yvonne to catch up some more, she stopped answering.
I said, whatever you need, we just need you to be okay. And we're not going to judge you. Just contact us. We just need to know you're okay.
And when Yvonne never came for the January 12th gathering, her parents feared the worst. Sadly, it would take 2 years until they would confirm their fears. First, authorities would uncover an email Yvonne sent to her Panama landlord.
Hey, Nene, Brian is a lying, cheating expletive, and I just couldn't stand dealing with it anymore. I'm in Costa Rica for a while with a guy I met at one of Brian's gigs when we first moved here. We've been talking off and on since then, and it's great to be spending time with someone who can be considered a gentleman.
It seemed like Brian's story was true, but again, Yvonne's family doubted this was really by her. Michelle enlisted a tech-savvy friend to track Yvonne's email address.
Michelle found out that the emails had come from
California.
Southern California.
The emails were actually coming from where Brian Brimminger was living.
In early 2012, Brian was living with his new bride, Kristen Werkoven. They'd tied the knot 2 days after his arrival in California.
Within 2 days, he's engaged.
Engaged, and he was married that same month.
Somebody forwarded me the registry from his new wife. I screamed.
As if there wasn't already enough evidence that Brian had done something horrible to Yvonne.
I'm telling you, look at this, look at this.
Were you enraged?
I was angry.
This is when Michelle filed a suspected murder. Before long, Californian authorities were working hand in hand with Panamanian ones, piecing together witness accounts to unravel a horrifying story.
The last time that she was seen alive was when a local saw them going towards a boat dock, and they were fighting, and Brimminger was dragging her by the arm back to the boat.
This was on the same day that they were heard fighting about Brian's double life, on November 26th. Just as frighteningly, Yvonne's dog was also missing, and her family knew she wouldn't just abandon her to flee to Costa Rica with a new man.
I called the Costa Rican embassy to see if she really went to Costa Rica, and she said nobody with that passport ever entered the country. When I called the American embassy in Panama, they said that she never left Panama. You know, I said, we gotta do something.
With the fake emails as evidence against him, the FBI invited Brian to do an interview.
He did sit and agree to speak with the FBI when it was still mostly a missing persons investigation.
As there was not enough evidence to keep him locked up, Brian was freed.
There hadn't been any proof she had been murdered, and certainly no proof that she had been murdered by Brimminger.
Meanwhile, James and Lillian flew to Panama to take matters into their own hands. Day by day, they would walk for miles, just looking for clues and asking anybody if they had seen Yvonne. While there were no more witnesses saying they'd seen Yvonne past November 26th, many people had seen Brian buying drinks for entire bars afterward. He was celebrating. James and Lillian could only imagine why. And when the authorities unearthed some purchases made from Yvonne's card in Costa Rica, they initially assumed Brian's story was true. But when they investigated Brian's plane tickets in December 2011, they discovered he'd returned to San Diego via Costa Rica. He was spending Yvonne's cash, all the while working hard to create an alibi for himself.
He purposefully took a trip to Costa Rica to bolster his story.
If all this isn't creepy enough, here's where it gets truly nasty.
Mr. Brimminger had brought a machete down to Panama with him. Then he had given the machete in exchange for a debt that he owed to a local Panamanian person that was there on the island.
You might wonder why a person would own a machete in the first place and bring it with him when moving countries. It gets worse. When the Panamanian local put the machete up for sale on a website, Brian saw the ad, so he logged in to post a comment. It actually used to be mine. I bought it in the States before I moved down here. Don't worry, I only discovered one stripper with it, so it's hardly used. Sheesh. This would not be funny in any context, let alone when you learn what he did with that machete. When this comment was unearthed, the FBI found the machete and brought it to the US for lab testing. To their surprise, it was clean of DNA. And a year into their frantic searches, James and Lillian were forced to leave Panama.
And when we had to leave the island, and when we had to leave the country, I could not live with myself. thinking that I left her behind.
Lillian had to be hospitalized after a mental breakdown, and around the same time, Yvonne's sister Michelle was diagnosed with breast cancer. The whole family was immensely suffering from the stress of looking for Yvonne, and Brian was playing golf and boasting about having a second baby with Kristen. But in 2013, he would finally be arrested on suspicion of murder.
Initially, he was charged with obstruction of justice and making false statements to federal officers. When he was interviewed, he lied about having Yvonne's computer, lied about beating Yvonne, lied about impersonating her through emails. He lied about multiple things with the intent to obstruct justice.
It was what the FBI could do to get him off the streets before they could use the mounting evidence to bring a more serious charge. 1 month later, on August 29, 2013, a hard piece of news rocked Panama and the U.S.
Forensic experts in Panama have identified a human skull found in the Central American country as that of missing American woman Yvonne Baldelli, who went missing 2 years ago. A backpack was discovered in the Panama jungle by a local resident. Authorities in Panama found the bag contained skeletal remains and some clothing.
Yvonne's head was stuffed in a duffel bag and left to rot in the jungle.
Are all of the body parts there?
No, they were not able to find an entire skeleton.
Because they didn't find all her remains.
That was hard too.
That was hard to know that there was pieces of her missing.
All the bones authorities had found had deep cuts on them. Yvonne was reduced to pieces.
It's just very hard to think that she was
Imagine learning that this was the fate of your loved one. When the news hit Michelle, she was already undergoing harrowing treatment with a pretty pessimistic prognosis. The heartbreak would contribute to her declining health.
You know, this is one of the most tragic parts of this case. Yvonne's sister, Michelle Valenzuela, was diagnosed with breast cancer. During the time that she was so desperately trying to find her sister and so desperately trying to find justice for her sister, she wasn't taking proper care of herself. She was so focused on her sister that she missed a lump in her breast.
When Yvonne's remains were found, Michelle's cancer had metastasized to her brain, but she still wanted to fight to put Brian in jail, so the FBI needed to move fast.
And so we sought an emergency deposition of a potential witness because we didn't believe that she would be able to make it all the way to trial.
Good afternoon, Ms. Valenzuela.
Good afternoon.
How are you?
I'm fine. I was saying that he murdered my sister.
Michelle died that day after her testimony. She had fulfilled her role in bringing justice to her sister.
To use the last moments of her life to sit down and to give everything she could.
It was one of the strongest demonstrations of strength and fortitude that I've ever seen. Mr. Brimminger really took both of their daughters.
While Brian was in jail awaiting trial and still denying everything, the FBI sent his machete to testing one more time. This time they discovered its handle was removable.
They removed the handle and found that there was blood under the handle. Same DNA as Yvonne Baldelli.
Only when Brian was confronted with this evidence did he start talking to his lawyers.
He pled guilty approximately 1 month before trial.
Brian said that after finding out about his double life, Yvonne threatened him with a knife. He grabbed it and stuck it in her back. As soon as he realized she was gone, he realized he had to throw her in the jungle.
In order to do that, he needed to get her to be small enough to fit in a backpack.
So he used his prized machete on her in the bathroom. Then he took her poor dog's life too. Georgia's remains were never found. Something else was discovered. Remember how Yvonne had written a letter to Brian's ex-wife exposing his lies? She had drafted another one intended for Kristen. If the email had reached Kristen, Brian knew he wouldn't be able to start a new life with her. So according to prosecutors, Yvonne never threatened Brian with a knife. Instead, he took her life to prevent her from ruining his plans with Kristen. He had to protect his lies one more time. He was sentenced to 26 years in prison. Nothing, if you ask Yvonne's family. Yvonne will be remembered as a happy, kind person who fell in love with a monster. Brian Brimmager will be forever remembered as a monster. He will be around 80 years old when he is released, if ever. Meanwhile, Yvonne's family can try to recover after losing both daughters, in their eyes, to this man. It will take a long time, but they can rest easy knowing Brimmager will not hurt anyone else anytime soon. Hey, thanks a bunch for watching. What are your thoughts on this case? Do you know other similar stories? Let me know in a comment, and before you leave, don't forget to like and subscribe. See you next time.